In the Victorian era in Britain, attitudes towards sexual behavior were conservative, and there were strict expectations for women's chastity and moral conduct. Unmarried pregnant women often faced abandonment or social exclusion. Poor families also often couldn't afford to raise extra children. As a result, an illegal institution called a baby farm emerged. They provided accommodation for pregnant women until they gave birth and charged a small fee, promising to raise the infants for those women and poor families. However, these illegal institutions often lacked proper supervision and safeguards, severely threatening the health and safety of the infants. Worse still, some even abused and killed the babies. At that time, a folk song circulated among the people with lyrics that went, "The old baby farmer, the wretched Miss Dyer, at the Old Bailey her wages is paid." In times long ago, we would have made a big fire and roasted so nicely that wicked old jade. This is the true story of a notorious serial killer named Amelia Elizabeth Hobley, who used a baby farm as a cover to murder countless infants. In 1837, Hobley was born in the village of Pillmarsh near Bristol. She was the youngest of 5 children. Her father was a shoemaker, and the family's prosperity allowed all the children to attend school. From a young age, Hobley showed a great love for poetry and literature. However, her childhood was marred by her mother's mental illness, which began with typhus and progressed due to lack of proper care. Hobley and her siblings witnessed their mother's odd behavior, which included paralysis and extreme mood swings. Then Hobley had to give up her literary pursuits to care for her mother. The times were harsh and medicine was not advanced. In 1841, Hobley's only sister died of illness. Years later, her parents had another daughter who also died after just a few months. The mother, already mentally ill, was devastated by the loss of 2 daughters. 3 years later, in 1848, she passed away. After her mother's death, for unknown reasons, Hobley went to live with an aunt for a while. As a young woman, she became an apprentice at a corset manufacturer. Time passed quickly, and in 1861, Hobley stayed at a hotel where she met George Thomas, aged 59. To make their marriage seem more normal and avoid ridicule, both lied about their ages when they registered their marriage. Hobley added 6 years to her age, and George subtracted 11 from his. In the early days of their marriage, Hobley became a nurse, a respectable yet demanding profession with long hours. A midwife suggested a simpler way to make money, running a baby farm. She advised Hobley to take in illegally pregnant young women, offer them accommodation until delivery, and then charge fees for baby care. This was because unwed mothers, facing income difficulties and social discrimination, and with no legal financial obligation from the child's father, struggled to raise children in a society that stigmatized single parenthood and illegitimacy. At first, Hobley did not take any action, but after giving birth to a daughter, she had to leave nursing care, and in 1869, after her husband's death, Hobley, needing an income, used her nursing background to start a baby farm. She was enthusiastic about making money from baby care, took in pregnant women, and placed ads to adopt babies. She told clients she needed only a small fee to provide adequate clothes and food, assured them of her nursing experience, and promised a safe and loving environment for their children. However, for unknown reasons, perhaps for profit, Hobley stopped caring for the babies. After unwed mothers and poor families brought their children to her, she killed them. This way, Hobley didn't have to spend most of the fees on food and clothes and could keep all the money. Her method was cruel. She used alcohol or drugs to quieten crying babies and fed them opium containing syrup. This caused the babies to lose their appetite, become malnourished, and die of starvation or drug overdose. In 1879, the 10th year of Hobley's baby farming operation, a doctor grew suspicious of her, because he had been often called to her house to certify infant deaths and issue death certificates. Others also had doubts about her, including potential adoptive parents and mothers concerned about their children's welfare. When they tried to visit the children, they were given excuses like the children being sick or unwilling to be adopted. Despite their suspicions, they didn't report her to the police out of fear and shame. Hobley was arrested by the police. However, she was not convicted of murder or manslaughter, but only sentenced to 6 months of hard labor. This verdict left many people incredulous. Her time in prison nearly destroyed her mentally, as she had become addicted to alcohol and opium. After her release, Hobley tried to resume her nursing career, but due to her mental instability and suicidal tendencies, she spent some time in a mental hospital. Having been detected by a doctor, Hobley changed her modus operandi. She no longer called doctors to issue death certificates, but disposed of the infant's bodies herself. To avoid detection and start new operations, she and her family frequently moved to different towns. Over the years, Hobley used several aliases. In January 1896, Evelina Marmon, a 25-year-old barmaid, gave birth to an illegitimate daughter, Doris, at a boarding house in Cheltenham. She placed an ad in the newspaper's classified section seeking a respectable woman who wanted a child, as she planned to return to work and eventually reunite with her child. Coincidentally, next to her ad was another one stating, "Childless married couple wants to adopt a healthy child. Beautiful country villa. Turns 10 pounds, Mrs. Harding." Evelina contacted Mrs. Harding and received a reply a few days later. The letter said, "I would be delighted to have a dear little girl, one I could bring up and call my own. We are plain and loving. Our living conditions are quite good. I want a child for company and home comfort. My husband and I both love children, but we have none of our own. The child with me will have a good home and motherly care." Evelina, not wealthy, wanted to pay a more affordable weekly fee for her daughter's care, but Mrs. Harding insisted on a one-time payment up front. Reluctantly, Evelina agreed to pay the 10 pounds. A week later they met, and Evelina was surprised by Mrs. Harding's advanced age and stout appearance. However, seeing her affection for Doris, Evelina handed over her daughter, a cardboard box of clothes, and the 10 pounds. She returned to her place, now a woman without her child. Days later, she received a letter from Mrs. Harding saying everything was fine. Evelina replied but never heard back. In reality, Mrs. Harding was an alias used by Hobley. Instead of taking Doris to a nice environment, she took her and the money to Wells, London, where her daughter lived. There, she got some white binding tape used in tailoring and wrapped it twice around Doris's neck and tied a knot, suffocating the infant. Hobley later said, "I used to like watching them with tape around their necks, but the suffering ended quickly." She kept some of Evelina's clothes and sold the rest to a pawn shop. She also paid rent to the unsuspecting landlady and gave her a pair of children's boots as a gift for her daughter. The next day, on Wednesday, April 1st, 1896, another child, Harry Simmons, aged 1, was brought there and strangled in the same way. On April 2nd, both remains were put into a carpet bag with bricks for weight, and Hobley dumped the bag into the Thames. Unbeknownst to Hobley, on March 30th, a lighterman found a floating parcel in the Thames containing the body of a female infant later identified as Helena Fry. The police found the name and address of Mrs. Thomas on the wrapping paper. This led them to Hobley, though they lacked strong evidence to directly link her to serious crimes. Witness accounts and information gathered could only heighten public anxiety if disclosed, so investigators were sent to surveil Hobley's home. To apprehend her, police planned to use a young woman as bait to meet Hobley and gather evidence of her crimes. As expected, Hobley, anticipating new clients, found investigators waiting outside her home and fled. On April 3rd, police raided Hobley's residence and were met with the stench of human decay. Though no remains were found, other relevant evidence was discovered, including white binding tape, telegrams about adoption, pawn tickets for children's clothing, advertising receipts, and letters from mothers inquiring about their children's well-being. Police estimated that Hobley had murdered at least 20 children in the past few months, a rate so high that it was suspected she might have killed over 400 infants and children over decades. On April 4th, Hobley was arrested and charged with murder, while her daughter and son-in-law were charged as accomplices. In April, 6 more remains were found in the Thames, including her last 2 victims, Doris and Harry. Each had been strangled with white tape, which Hobley later told the police was her signature method of killing. In early May, during the police investigation into the deaths, no evidence was found to suggest that Hobley's daughter and son-in-law were accomplices. They were released after Hobley's written statement. In prison, she wrote, "Sir, please allow me to submit this statement to the magistrate on Saturday the 18th, as I may not have another chance. I must rest. I know my days in this world are numbered, but I feel it would be terrible to involve innocent people. I know I must answer for my terrible crimes before my Creator in heaven, but as the Almighty God is my judge in heaven, whether by the fireplace or elsewhere, I solemnly declare that my daughter and her husband are not involved. They never knew I intended to do such evil until it was too late. I speak the truth, nothing but the truth, for I hope to be forgiven. I, and I alone, must stand before my Creator in heaven to answer for everything. Witness my hand, Amelia Hobley." On May 22nd, Hobley admitted to murdering Doris, During her trial, her family and colleagues testified that they had become increasingly suspicious and uneasy about her activities. A man also witnessed Hobley disposing of 2 remains, and his testimony was crucial. Her daughter provided vivid evidence that helped secure her conviction. Hobley's only defense was insanity, citing her 2 admissions to a Bristol mental hospital. However, the prosecution successfully argued that her mental instability was an act to avoid suspicion, and her hospitalizations coincided with fears of her crimes being exposed. The jury took only 4.5 minutes to convict Hobley. During her 3 weeks in the condemned cell, she filled 5 exercise books with her final, truthful confession. When a clergyman visited her the night before her execution and asked if she had any final statement, she handed him her notebooks and said, "Is this not enough?" On Wednesday, June 10, 1896, Hobley was hanged at Newgate Prison. When asked if she had any final words, she replied, "I have nothing to say." After her death, a folk song spread, "The old baby farmer, the wretched Miss Dyer, at the Old Bailey her wages is paid. In times long ago we would have made a big fire, and roasted so nicely that wicked old jade.